to Representative Paul.
Yeah.
On that.
Oh, that?
Yeah. Commissioner Chris Kirby.
Do you want me to pass that camera on?
That would be great.
This is the actual body camera. If it's detachable, this acts like a battery pack and it just goes like so.
So there are two different cameras there, both of which Taser produces currently.
Is
They
that
do
one
range
helmet?
in that $400 range. The single pack is $300 a piece. The smaller camera is about $500 a piece.
As small as they are, they take a good picture.
Terrific picture, yeah. 480 by 640 is the resolution. There's 3 different grades to resolutions.
Go ahead with your testimony.
Excellent.
Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, Representative Tasker, and fellow members of the committee. First, let me express my gratitude for you having me here today. While I work for Taser International, I come to speak as both a technologist as well as a citizen at large, albeit not here in this state, rather down in Pennsylvania. Today I'll speak from both of those perspectives, as I think both have valuable considerations. First, as a citizen at large, I can't tell you how many times I heard from my grandmother growing up, Chris, I wish you could live in a society as safe and as carefree as I grew up in. It's sad how things are today. I can't even send you to school without watching over you. Her sentiment sits well with me and is one of the reasons why I went to work for Taser on behalf of law enforcement throughout this country. They do a tremendous job and I very much appreciate their efforts. Unfortunately, they've been tested in this, our increasingly litigious society. He said, she said. People on simple traffic stops can make false claims because they know the court will find it difficult to resolve the he said, she said dispute. In fact, there is nothing to prove what actually had it beyond the testimony of both the officer and the citizen. Due to this, some of our public dollars are going toward increasing administrative costs and settlements, not fully to the officers patrolling the streets. We want our streets safer, which is increasingly tough to achieve with officers spending more time taking care of administrative matters, fighting complaints or claims that are not currently resolved by the statement, see the video. With tightening financial times, however, are we going to accomplish these safer streets? For this reason, let me offer my thoughts as a technologist. Think back to the first NASA team and the technologies they used to get us to the moon. It took massive computers, bigger than this room itself, and millions of dollars to build that infrastructure. Think of those technologies and investments in terms of what we have today. This simple iPhone has thousands of times the computing power of that very first computer and costs less than $500. Technology is advancing at an exponential rate, and unfortunately, most of that technology is falling into the hands of the more sophisticated private citizen, leaving the public, officials, and those who we protect very far behind. We must step up and we must step forward. For this, I must commend Representative Tasker, the co-sponsors of this important piece of legislation, and this committee for having me here today. You're ahead of most, and your thought leadership and debate on this important topic is welcomed and applauded. Technology in law enforcement is advancing. Body cameras are a significant part of this and likely yield the highest return on investment of any technology you can put in law enforcement today. I'll get to those statistics in just a minute. Years ago, we had nothing to tell what happened on the street. We then advanced to in-car systems that were wonderfully powerful in telling what had happened from the car's perspective. And we have now advanced, similar to NASA to this iPhone, to technologies that can sit in a single encapsulated unit that can sit on the officer and tell the story from that officer's perspective, tell their story, and defend them against the false complaints and litigation that could be posed against them and our cities. Statistics show that when cameras are worn and visible to the public, both the citizen and the officer work in a more professional manner, thus reducing liability in the field by reducing the amount of use of force and minimizing the complaints that come in off the street. Safer engagements and less investigations equal more officers on our streets and less money unnecessarily spent on administrative costs, investigations, and settlements. I will now turn to a more detailed walkthrough of considerations, what we've seen in the field, and what things to consider with this technology. Feel free to ask questions either throughout or at the end, depending on how you set up here. And again, my thanks for having me here today. Let's turn to the, I asked Representative Tasker to submit some documents for your consideration. The first is an article in the New York Times that covered a story from Rialto, California, which was a police force that began using the smaller camera, and over the course of a year, with Cambridge University, did a study of the impact of these cameras on their police force. And what they concluded after a year was that they saw a near 60% reduction in use of force and a near 90% reduction in complaints against the agency. To the first point, the 59% reduction in use of force, we had asked the chief of police there, Chief Tony Farrar, why he thought that with cameras present there was such a significant drop in use of force, and he posited the belief that when cameras are present, if a citizen knows that they are recorded or are capable of being recorded, they are more likely, more apt to act in a disciplined way, and therefore are less likely to grow into a more aggressive situation where the officer would have to use force. Less force means fewer investigations, which means less of a burden on the police force and eventually the city who pays for those investigations and settlements. Second point is the reduction in complaints. They saw a near 90% reduction in complaints over the course of a year, which just essentially means if I'm a citizen, I know something went out on the street, maybe it was a headlight being out, a taillight out, I know that I could file a claim that's very tough to prove one way or the other what actually happened down the street. Maybe it was harassment that I claimed, maybe it was something else that I claimed. With video evidence available, this police force in California saw that there was a near 90% reduction in complaints because citizens knew that what happened on the street was recorded and could be accessed by that police department in the investigation, so it wasn't worth submitting something to them. Fewer complaints, again, mean fewer investigations, which means fewer burden, less of a burden to our police forces, and more return to the society. That study is more well documented in the Rialto study, which is attached in this packet. There was also another study done on Lake Havasu Police Department, which is in Arizona, which saw similar reductions in both use of force complaints, but also saw a near 7% increase in efficiency because their officers were able to return to the streets. Other considerations here, and I hear the Commissioner's statement earlier, certainly policy is extremely important when it comes to this, so I've submitted 2 sample policies. One is the special order from Fort Worth Police down in Texas, who has moved to about 300 of these cameras. The other is from New Orleans Police Department, which has just recently moved to these cameras, has about 400 of them as well. And then finally, there is a map of the United States. These are studies that TASER, my company, is aware of both the reduction in use of force, reduction in complaints that we've seen throughout the country. These are benefits that could certainly be available to your cities today, and in particular to this hearing to the state police today, which do a tremendous job here in the state already. Those are the considerations and documents. Let me just leave you with these considerations as well. First, the trend in law enforcement is to body cameras. All the major institutions, whether it be the Department of Justice, whether it be the Police Executive Research Forum, which is a think tank based down in Washington, D.C., are now starting to really focus some research, hone in some research, as was stated earlier down at the University of Central Florida, to see what results police agencies can really garner from this equipment. Major cities, ironically enough, have been some of the first to move on this equipment. New Orleans, Las Vegas, and Salt Lake City are 3 within this country that have moved to these technologies through TASER itself. Middle-sized cities, smaller cities are also adopting this technology. Recognizing this trend, there are in-car system vendors that are now partnering with body camera companies to make this happen in their municipalities as well. So just recognizing the trend, they're jumping on board. And then finally, here in New Hampshire, just agencies that my team has worked with, they're including but not limited to Hinsdale, Milton, Charleston, Haverhill, Northwood, Berlin, and Merrimack County or Department of Corrections have all purchased from TASER, most of which are pilot programs, similar to what the recommendation is on the amendment, to see what kind of results, to see what kind of challenges come with the equipment. Just kind of the trend in law enforcement. The second consideration here is also body cameras make the most financial sense of all equipment for agencies large and small. Body cameras cost between $300 and $1,000 a unit for quality units, and capture all of which the police are doing, whether it be to the right-hand side of the vehicle, left-hand side of the vehicle, behind the vehicle, out on a street corner, for between $300 and $1,000. In-car systems, the dating technology, captures just what's fixed in front of the vehicle and cost between $4,000 and $7,000 a unit. That's one additional consideration, and with that, I will really turn to the committee here to answer any questions on anything that I've gone through. I also have a sample of what all it takes to start up one of these programs, because it does take the hardware on the front end, but there's also been a terrific job by Representative Tasker, by the Commissioner, to understand all else that's required: servers, cooling systems, personnel, amount of time that's required, what it takes to actually build out those systems. And those are all things that we can discuss either online or offline.
Representative Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. You heard earlier that there may be some discussions about the cost of this. We're a very fiscally conservative state. But in your experience and research, have you seen reductions in other expenditures in police departments that would offset the cost of these, such as fewer arrests or fewer frivolous lawsuits or less overtime paid? Can you give us an idea of how the cost could be offset?
Certainly. To the first point of Rialto, California, which was the first rigorous level 5 study done by a university, we're now in phase 2 with them to basically examine budget in 2011, budget in 2012, and then what they're spending in 13 with cameras. So really to expand on those numbers, what it did to personnel, what it did to investigations, all that. Burnsville, which is a police department in Minnesota, did an estimate of how much it costs to investigate every complaint that comes into their agency. And they estimated that every complaint, based on the initial complaint, the detective sergeant doing the initial investigation, all the steps in that process to do due diligence in an agency, cost for between $1,500 and $3,000 worth of personnel just to investigate that complaint and come to a resolution on that complaint. Ergo, I'll give you the example of Rialto. Rialto saw their complaints drop from 26 against the agency in 2012, or 2011 when they did not have cameras, to 2 complaints in 2012 when they did have cameras. If 24 complaints were reduced and the average cost were between $1,500 and $3,000 a year, that's a substantial return in other areas, that being personnel costs, which aren't as drilled down into by police forces. Second point on that is Chief Tom Stryker, who was the former major city chief for one of the smaller large cities, Cincinnati, believed that if he had moved to this technology sooner, he's now retired, but if he had moved to this technology sooner, that it was going to relieve his overtime budget by at least 50%. Because if there are fewer investigations, there's more efficient policing, there's less to actually do with a computer, that it could just make a significant impact to their agency. Again, those studies are still outstanding, but are certainly things that we're developing toward because it does produce significant benefits.
Thank you.
Representative Gagnon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question, sir. These cameras, can the data captured on these cameras be doctored, altered in any way?
It's an excellent question, Representative. Both of these cameras are solid state memory, which essentially means that it's sealed in. You cannot pull anything from it. If it fell into the hands of somebody else, They can't change it, they can't access it. And to the police department, we've designed a system, because that was a major concern, where the officers come in off the street, put it into a docking station. The docking station then manages the upload process, and they cannot tamper with it at all. To drill down to that even further, Representative, there are technological details of these systems. It's called hash values, that essentially for everything printed on these, there's a digital fingerprint at every 5 frames per second. If those digital fingerprints get into the management system, and the management system shows the same value, called the hash value, then it shows technologically from an engineering perspective that the video went untampered with. So our answer is, can some systems be tampered with? Yes. To our systems in particular, we've designed it so that that question didn't become a problem further on down the road.
Madam Chair, just as a point of order, Representative Warden was a co-sponsor of the last bill and was told shouldn't be asking questions. Representative Gagnon is a co-sponsor of this bill.
And they asked for clarification earlier, and I didn't get it.
I'm sorry. I didn't even look.
Okay, I will withdraw.
All right, thank you. Representative Cushing, do you have a question?
What generation are you in now in this type of technology of body cameras? And how is it, how's the the efficiency and the cost move?
I.e., you're speaking to
Are you in
developments
the
in the
first
technology.
generation now of the body cameras, right? Or is it first or second generation?
This is the 3rd generation.
Third generation? Could you, what was the cost between the first, second, and third? How is it moving, say, per unit?
Sure, absolutely. So the first system generated was about $1,000 a unit. It then reduced into about half with the second and third generations. The second generation is $500. The third generation is $300. So there is a gradual decline.
Now, Representative Brady?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have a comment.
These cameras are on from the moment the officer leaves the station until he or she comes back into the station and docks them. Is that correct?
So how they specifically work is, it works throughout an entire shift. When I head out on shift, these cameras in particular, I turn on the top button and it puts it into a 30-second pre-event buffer mode, which essentially technologically is, there are 30 seconds of recording going over and over and over. It's not committed to memory until I, as the officer, commit it to memory. So once I press the center button, that's when it starts the actual recording. So they're on and running, but not committing anything until memory, until the officer says for it to commit to memory.
But that would be as soon as the officer starts the shift on the outside. Meaning, this thing is recording for the entire shift. Is that correct?
So, in my experience working with police departments, the typical policy that's written in here is that they turn it on to the buffer mode, which is not committing it to memory, throughout their entire shift, and when in contact with a citizen, they actually commit it to memory. Different states, different laws, different ways to go about it.
So there are guidelines, strict guidelines, I assume,
Absolutely. And that's
about when it is actually turned on
correct.
to record.
Correct.
So could that be in a situation where, I'm sorry, I'm asking for a
That's
follow-up.
all right.
Thank
Follow
you.
up.
So that means that if an officer is in a patrol car, driving down 93, would that be a situation where he or she may click it on to record?
If the agency has decided that that's going to be the policy, or if the state has decided that that's going to be the policy, then the answer is yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Representative Robertson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To follow up, can it store the entire shift?
The answer is yes. Our cameras in particular, they have 3 different settings. The highest setting can record for 5 hours continuous. The medium setting, which is what most people use, can require for 9 hours continuous. And the lowest setting of quality can require or can record for 12 hours continuous. So the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Representative Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your information.
The data storage part of this, is that proprietary to work with only these cameras? In other words, does a provider of the cameras also provide the data storage service? Is that like a package?
So there are two different ways that we do it at TASER. The one is to give you an open MP4 format, which is just a typical what you have on your computer, that you can do it that way and store it in-house. We also have a system where it's owned and operated by the agency, and they can store and manage that way. That's what most of the major cities are doing, and it is not proprietary to TASER. We created an open platform so that other pieces of data could be shared and stored and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
Representative Valencourt.
Thank you. For once, I look forward to reading the handouts. My question is that these all seem to be dealing with cities and counties. Have any state police done this statewide for the whole department?
The answer is no. The first agency, and that's why I commended your thought leadership on this topic, the first agency that is looking seriously at it, state police agency, is the Florida Highway Patrol.
You finished, Representative Valencourt?
Yes, yes.
Representative Cushing?
It caught my attention that it was $7,000 for a dash camera, and I'm wondering, would these cameras replace the dash cameras?
Again, that's up to local leaders that are going to have to make that decision. We have seen two different ways that agencies are going. The first, the more conservative approach, is to use them as a supplement to the dash cameras. The other is a more aggressive approach, and some agencies are choosing to get rid of their in-car systems all in all and use these 100% of the time.
Representative Fields?
Yeah, one quick question that brought to my mind about when you use the camera and the officer's doing all that, and all of a sudden he has to go to court. Does the court have to have a special equipment that picks up on this if they go to court to testify?
The answer is no. It's an open MP4 format, which is accessible via any typical media player, whether it be a Windows. It's all on stock on your computers.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for the gentleman? Seeing none, I thank you very much.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.